in the midst of there. And good evening, everyone. It looks like we've got, what, a couple of dozen or so folks on the line. Again, I'm Scott Bittler with Gartner. I don't know what you've told them about me.
I was done. All I told them was, gee, I hope he shows up. Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in the class tonight. I've had the pleasure of participating in some classes with Penn State at various levels I've worked with the university for over 10 years now in various programs, whether it be executive management programs or master's degree class programs like this or whatever. So I'm always happy to speak to the groups. My role at Gartner, for those that aren't familiar with me, and hello everyone, I see it all in the chat there. Appreciate the warm welcome, virtually speaking. But I am currently a vice president and team manager in the Enterprise IT Leaders Program at Gartner, which is one of our two premium level service programs where we work with business and IT leaders on, the domain that I work in within the Enterprise IT Leaders family is called Enterprise Architecture and Innovation. And we also deal with business and IT strategy as well as data and analytics as well. We've got about 5 other domains in the Enterprise IT Leaders family dealing with other dimensions of the technology landscape. But here we're focused on, I'll call it the strategic disciplines primarily with strategy, architecture, innovation, and such. Formerly, I was a leadership partner for a couple of years, and before that, I was a vice president in Gartner Research for about 15 and a half years between Gartner and Metagroup. Before that, Gartner bought Metagroup a few years back. So that's my context. And before that, I was a practitioner at Corning in this field of enterprise architecture. So I've been in the shoes of many of you out there in organizations trying to actually do this stuff for real. I started the first ever architecture program at Corning and hired the first architect in the company and was pretty successful at a business unit division and corporate-wide level. For a pretty big Fortune 500 company. So that's enough about my background. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of context and perspective on some of the remarks that I'll share. And some of what I'll share tonight will really not be, well, virtually all of what I share tonight will not really just be Scott's opinion on things, although I have my opinions for sure, but rather Gartner research positions on the topics that we're going to get into. Which I happen to agree with because they're rooted in reality of what we see as best practices research. And it's hard to argue with reality. So with that, I think the plan is I've been asked to focus on the topic of traditional versus business outcome driven EA. But before I get into that, I think I was asked a question that I managed to somehow dodge or avoid, and I forgot what the question was that you introduced me with. So perhaps I should try to answer it before I move on. What was that?
I forget. That was a long time ago. That's okay. That was just my segue. That was just my segue into introducing, having you introduce yourself.
Very
so
good.
Yes.
Very good. Well, what
traditional versus outcome, right?
Yes, and so what I thought I would do is share some kind of prepared thoughts and remarks around this topic with the group, and then really engage in some, I hope, substantial kind of Q&A and discussion with the group. Now, do we have live mics for everyone, or only the chat method of communication back to us as speakers on the line?
Most people on here have mics, just we're all usually muted.
Very good, very good. Good to know. And you sounded very clear. So yeah, I think I would. We can certainly take some comments or questions in the chat, but then I'd also very much welcome. And we don't have so many people on the line here. We have a few open. It'll be technically, I think, when we get into discussion. But generally, it's a great idea to stay on mute, of course, when you're not active. So I'll share a few thoughts on this topic. And then we'll get into some discussion. I recognize that most, if not all of you, are practicing professionals in organizations out there, in multiple industries. Some of you with well-established EA programs in place. Some of you probably with nascent EA programs in place, and perhaps some of you without much of anything, but aspiring to do something. So you're probably all over the maturity curve across the folks represented in the room. And so I hope to share perspectives that all of you, no matter where you are in the maturity curve, can benefit from. Let's push the envelope and advance the discipline forward. Because one of the things we know is that if you study highest performing organizations and specifically study what makes them high performing, what are the things they do that are different, that allow them to have that higher level of performance. Among the list of things you'll find as common denominators is that they have some sort of critical mass of focus in the way they do strategic planning, which is essentially some form of EA, some form of enterprise architecture. And in other words, a project by project kind of a do the best you can on each project approach just isn't good enough. And so I think I want to kind of work my way into this topic by a very brief history lesson as we talk about business outcome driven EA. Because if you look at the history of the discipline, the term was coined in 1987 when John Zachman wrote an article in the IBM Systems Journal that referenced this term called enterprise architecture. Now, the discipline's been around longer than that. I personally can relate to that because I was practicing EA before we called it EA. I was just one of those weird people in the world that are kind of wired to think like this. And so I approached many problems this way, and I'm sure many, many, many others around the world did likewise. But it kind of started to get crystallized around a label and a discipline in 1987 with that piece of work. So in the early days, that Zachman approach, and I'm sure if you're probably already familiar with the Zachman framework from the class or from your own professional studies and work, and if not, you'll soon learn. It's one of many frameworks. And the initial era, I'm going to go through three major eras in the history of the evolution of EA. And the latest one is this business outcome driven one. But it began with the first era, which was a framework focused approach to the discipline. In the first many years of the practice of EA, starting with 1987, was a very framework focused approach, whether it was the Zachman framework or any number of the other frameworks. And at Gartner, we've cataloged over, well, the last time we did a formal categorization, it was over 90 EA frameworks out there in the world. That's right, over 90. And today there's probably over 100 easily. I don't have an accurate number today, but it's huge. It's ridiculously large. But the barrier to entry is low, right? I mean, anybody can publish a framework and very low cost on the internet and say, I've got one too. So folks took a very framework oriented approach, and that was kind of part of this initial traditional approach to EA. Pick a framework, fill out the framework with content and artifacts, and there you go, you've got EA. Well, that left people wanting. It left people unsatisfied, shall we say, in terms of its meaningful impact to the business. Because it was almost like EA for the sake of EA. It was fill out the framework for the sake of filling out the framework. And so people were like, okay, well, how can we do better? And that led to the second era of EA, which was a process-oriented focus to the discipline. Frameworks didn't deal with process. They didn't deal with the sequencing of, what do you do first? What do you do second? What's the flow? How do you frameworks don't deal with that. So the process-focused approach to EA began to address that issue of the process to the discipline. Not that frameworks were thrown completely to the wind, but they were thought of more as a taxonomy for organizing your stuff. And yeah, it's probably good to have a taxonomy to organize your stuff. But process became more of the focus. Well, after a number of years, that started to leave people unsatisfied as well. Something was still missing. And once again, it was almost like people got caught up in this dogmatic approach to process, and it was, the EA process for the sake of the EA process, yet another kind of trap, if you will, with that kind of focus. And that led to the current era, the third major wave, if you will, in the evolution of the discipline, which is what we're calling at Gartner the business outcome driven approach to EA. And this era started, well, I guess I'll say 3-ish years ago, or so, somewhere in that range. 2, 3, 4 years ago, somewhere in that kind of range. Probably 3, 4 years ago. Maybe 5 at the outside. So we're relatively early in this era, is my point. And boy, it's showing a lot of promise already. So what's going on with that? What makes it different? And so that's what I think we want to focus on tonight. But I wanted to kind of set that context for how we got here, because I think it's insightful to understand what we're trying to do differently here that wasn't hitting the spot, shall we say, for the value from it in the earlier days. And so what's different in the business outcome-driven approach to EA is architects are getting, I'll say, a bit more pragmatic and a bit less idealistic in the approach. EA is a holistic discipline that, as I'm sure you know by now, includes 4 major dimensions. There's the business, the information, the technology, and the solutions architecture viewpoints on the discipline, or subdimensions, if you will, of the discipline. So it's broader, bigger and broader than Zachman conceived in 1987 when he coined the term. Back then, it was mostly about just the technical architecture, and it wasn't even really about the entire technical architecture. It was kind of a subset of that. So it's a much more broad, holistic discipline today. But one of the problems is that architects got, in the course of trying to be holistic, they almost went too far, and they tried to kind of architect the entire enterprise, and just this kind of let's think through the whole problem and let's architect the whole thing. And while that theoretically is ideal, pragmatically, it's not so easy to do successfully. It's biting off too much, quite frankly. And organizations got kind of stuck in the clouds, not to be confused with cloud computing there, but stuck in the ivory tower of thinking about how to architect the whole thing. So with the business outcome-driven approach, the idea here is to understand first, as has always been a best practice, by the way, the business strategy and direction of the organization. Where are they trying to go with the organization, whether it's public or private sector, whether it's profit-driven or not? Where are they trying to go? What are they trying? What's the better enterprise of tomorrow that the leadership aspires to become? And once you understand that, then you derive from that a bit, kind of peel the onion a layer and say, okay, now what are the transformational business outcomes that we need to go out and execute on to make that strategic vision happen, right? So now we're getting it, we peel the onion down to a bit more actionable, specific level about what are we going to go out and actually do. So you've got a list of those now, and we'll come back and probably talk about some examples in a moment. But then once you have those, now from an architecture perspective, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to pick 1, 2, probably 3 at the most, selectively choose from among that larger list of transformational business outcomes. We're going to pick 1, 2, or 3 of them, and we're going to go out and architect kind of just enough, just in time, to address those outcomes with laser focus on contributing to better fulfillment of those outcomes than would otherwise happen in the absence of this approach. And by doing that successfully, demonstrating business value from the program, and thereby earning the right to expand and spread one's wings a bit broader and tackle some additional business outcomes, and have a broader influence on the enterprise. Okay, and this is just a so much more pragmatic, more realistically achievable goal than kind of architecting the big enchilada, so to speak. And it brings early wins, quick wins to the program. It brings credibility. It brings business aha moments, if you will, or wow moments that they can see how you're making a difference and contributing, and it builds credibility for them, and again earns the right to become even more strategic, more impactful, with perhaps more ambitious business outcomes to be tackled in a second wave and third wave and fourth and so on. So now, do we throw away frameworks? No. We still use frameworks for EA, but we use them in the context of what they were originally meant for, which is a taxonomy to organize your stuff. Do we throw away process? No, we don't throw away process. There's still process involved, but we're going to do just enough process, just in time, to address these outcomes. Now, while you're tackling an individual business outcome, you certainly need to think about the bigger context in which you're doing it. So I said laser focus on the outcome, but it's kind of like the think global, act local concept, right? So you still want to keep the larger context of the enterprise in mind as you're doing it, because ultimately you want to make sure that the other parts of the architecture that you tackle later with other outcomes that you address are going to weave together into a nice tapestry that fits, and not have a bunch of fractionalized contributions that don't fit together. Now that's a bit challenging to do, I'll admit, but and we're perhaps going to miss some idealistic fit opportunities because we're breaking it down and tackling more individual outcomes rather than architecting the whole. But what we trade off there from the perhaps larger ideal turns out to be way more pragmatically valuable to organizations to do. And so we're seeing great success with organizations tackling it with this approach, improving their ability to communicate with business leaders and bring business value that's seen and recognized by business leaders and not just their own IT leaders. And they're really making tracks with this. Now, this of course guides then, in turn, these business outcome statements provide clear guidance for the specific architecting that needs to be done in each of the individually four kind of sub-architecture areas that we talked about earlier, the business information, technical and solutions areas, so that they're each, so that the architecting in each of those viewpoints makes its appropriate contribution to the fulfillment of the larger outcomes. Now we can get into some other areas like what are the 5 major deliverable categories that these programs get into, and some other things. But I think it's maybe a good time to pause and maybe start to engage the group. How does this strike you? How does this? What questions may it raise for you? Have you seen some evidence of this working in your organization? What do you say?
Come on.
This is where you unmute your microphones and actually kick in.
That's right. Hello.
Maybe I put them to sleep. I hope I didn't put them to sleep.
No, I don't think so. Well, I'll ask a question. So, Scott, from a organizational cultural aspect, or, how do organizations accomplish this transition from established traditional EA to outcome-driven EA? Yeah,
so thank you for that.
That's a tough question, I think.
Maybe that'll get the juices flowing for the others to chime in here. You're right. It's tough because, in fact, it's probably the toughest part because it is cultural change. You hit the key word. Culture change is what we're talking about here, and culture change is hard, no matter what the culture change is. So it's not hard just because it's this. It's because culture change is hard, right? Now, so how do you do that? Well, culture change is So first you got to recognize that if you're involved in this, you're a change agent, right? And you recognize that the people dimension, which is the culture piece, is the hardest part. Actually, the technical stuff is relatively easy by comparison. And so we need to deal with culture change at a couple different levels. We need to deal with it at the level of engaging with IT and business leaders, and we need to deal with it at the level of engaging with project level contributors, project level teams, and because projects are the transformational agent of organizations. It's projects that change, from the way we do things now to some improved, better thing for tomorrow. And so we need to win over IT and business leaders, if you will, for this change and this transformation, and we need to win over the people in the trenches that are actually doing stuff out there and making things happen. And the way you approach each of those is not the same, right? The way you do executive level briefings and education is you're not going to hit on the same things that you're going to hit on when you're dealing with the folks that are working with the details. So we have to recognize our audiences that we need to go after. We need to have a communication campaign that engages the right people to speak to the right level of individuals and strikes at what they care about. So, I forget who said the quote. At the end of the day, all people really care about is what they really care about, right? So, in other words, we're all pretty self-centered when at the end of the day, and so when you're trying to sell somebody on an idea to motivate cultural change, you need to hit them at the level of what they care about, right? Which means you need to take time to understand what they do care about. So, what do your IT leaders and business leaders care about? What keeps them up at night? What are the things that are going to hit them where it matters? And if you can talk about how this approach makes a contribution to the things that they care about most, then what's the likelihood they're going to care about this at all? Well, it goes up dramatically, doesn't it? Right? They're going to care about anything that makes a material contribution to the things that they care about most, right? If you can help with those things, then I want you on my team, right? Anything else is a distraction to them, right? So understanding, and for business leaders, it's all about helping them execute where they're trying to go. That's what they care about, right? And that's why this business outcome-driven approach resonates so well with people at that level, because you can speak their language. You can talk about how this contributes to the stuff that matters most to them, and draw line of sight contribution to that. And that when you can get them on board, then cultural change happens as a leadership-driven type of transformation. So having those business leaders, those key stakeholders on board is important. Now, the IT leaders, they certainly hopefully care about, at some level, the same bigger Uber level goals and objectives of the business, but they've obviously got their own spin on it, right? So you need to kind of translate it into their language. How's this going to hit on the things they care about? Your CIO and CTO and those kinds of folks. And then from the individual contributor level, primarily let's talk about the technologists in IT, but it's not just about IT, right? It's individual people in the rest of the organization as well, but I'm going to use the IT folks as an example, is how does it help them do their job easier or better or with less effort or less time? How does it ultimately help them rather than become a burden to them, right? That's what's going to get them interested, right? If this is seen as an enforcement activity or a compliance activity or something that puts undue constraints in inappropriate places on what they're trying to do, they're not going to see this as positive and healthy. They're not going to be jumping on the bandwagon of this cultural change, right? But if they can see it helping them get their thing done, if they can see it freeing up time to apply in a more creative and constructive way, well, then, yeah, maybe this is an ally, not a threat to them.
Great.
And indeed, when you do it right, it will do those things.
We have another question. Oh,
yeah, it's easier said than done because.
Well, of course it is. That's why they need you.
They get free to do anything they want. They get to handle little errors or whatever they need. They're totally unfocused, but they get to do it, get it done, and be done with it. And now you say, well, no, you've got to align and help us build this larger strategy. It's hard to sell them that they benefit right away, or they particular benefit versus maybe the organization as a whole benefits. It's a struggle I have right now that it's.
Yeah, so what this struggle is about is really the question of what are we trying to optimize? Are we trying to optimize in the small or optimize in the large, right? I mean, do at the end of the day, it's about shareholder value, right? For most organizations. In the case of the public sector, it's about taxpayer value, right? Those are the shareholders. But so at the end of the day, the organization exists to drive higher shareholder value. So at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is really optimization, in the large, right? For the enterprise as a whole. You don't get an optimal enterprise by optimizing all the individual tiny little parts of what's going on and then just somehow magically it's going to piece together into an optimal whole. It doesn't work like that, right? So but that's the way people behave sometimes. They're just trying to optimize their little piece of the world, right? Or what they see as their piece of the world. And so what we've got to do is kind of shift the mindset for people and help them understand that, hey, that's not why you're here. That's not what we pay you for, right? We pay you for being a contributor to optimizing what matters most in delivering shareholder value. And that doesn't happen by everybody getting their way all the time in their own local, piece of the world, right? That's not what yields optimal, the optimal big picture. So when people understand, and people do get motivated and excited about contributing to a vision that is big and burly and significantly impactful, and it's bigger than themselves. And if they can see how their piece of the puzzle fits in that larger vision, that's motivating for people. So it's about shifting that perspective of what are we really trying to accomplish, and getting everybody to focus on contributing to that. And that gets them off of that, let me just optimize my little thing here, right? And let me give you an example. When I was at Corning, do we have any Corning people in the class, by the way? I can talk more openly about them if they're not here.
I don't think so.
But I remember from back in the day, we had a business strategy and outcome that we were going after that was basically, we wanted to be at half the manufacturing cost of our nearest competitor on our highest volume product, okay, which happened to be single mode fiber at the time in the optical fiber business. And that was a big burly goal that we rallied around as an organization, which is, by the way, does wonderful things for profits when you do that in a manufacturing industry for any product line. You think about that. If you're at half the cost of your nearest competitor on your highest volume product, think about what that does for net profits. It's a beautiful thing. And we wanted to do that within 3 years. Well, we achieved it. And we achieved it because the organization really got laser focused around that big burly goal, right? And by the way, we did that in the face of declining prices in the market, right? So it was a very challenging time, and we also did it with the highest quality product, by the way, in the market, which meant that we could command the highest price in that time as well. So the point is that the optimization point was at that larger level, right? And getting people really rallied around that. Now, I don't understand that acronym somebody just put in the chat window. Enterprise level PEBKAC. What is that?
I'm so glad you don't understand it either, because I thought it was just me. Josh. Problem exists between keyboard and chair. I love it.
I've heard that one before. That's interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Jyoti, okay, Jyoti asked a question. How do you differentiate outcome-driven EA from project management and execution?
So they are sister disciplines that dovetail beautifully together when they're done right. Okay, project management and execution. So think about it at. Let me use an analogy, perhaps, to make the point. And it's not so much just outcome-driven EA, but EA in general as a differentiation from project management and execution. Whether it's outcome-driven EA or any other EA, even the prior focused, the process-focused EA or the framework-focused EA, it differentiates from project management and execution the same way. So the difference, EA is a discipline that rides above and across the organizational structure and above and across projects, programs, and provides guides to projects and programs, right? So, I mean, projects and programs have to make lots of decisions in the life cycle of a project and program on scope and design and all those things all the way through, right? And EA exists to provide prescriptive and pragmatic guidance for decision making by project programs, so that they will not only solve the problem but solve the problem in a way that fits in the larger scope or the larger ecosystem, if you will, that they contribute in. So, in other words, let me say it away. In the absence of EA, what happens? We have projects. We start projects. Management execution of the projects. But in the absence of EA, what you have is a project by project, wing it the best way you can on the project approach, and that yields every time. In the absence of EA, it always yields net an aggregation of outputs across projects and programs that when you step back and look at the aggregation, there's rampant needless complexity across that aggregation. Needless complexity, in other words, non-value-added complexity. And that non-value-added complexity has serious consequences associated with it. It yields cost to the enterprise to both and maintain. It introduces technical risk, which also in turn causes risk. It introduces quality problems, specifically data quality problems, because you've typically got apps that are applications or solutions that are stepping on each other, causing data integrity problems. You've got all these things going on. Somebody's video is going in and out. I don't know what I can do about that. But hopefully it's working for most everyone. Do I sound okay to you, Professor Rocker?
Better now, yes. Okay.
I didn't change a thing, but okay. So the thank you for Alfredo. So the distinction here is that EA exists to fill that white space between strategy and projects, that is translating strategy into direction that projects should be utilizing to produce better outcomes that fit in the picture better than would otherwise happen, and avoid this needless or reduce or minimize this needless complexity that has so many negative consequences associated with it. And also, so EA affects both how we do what we do, but it also affects what we do, right? So it helps us guide and direct what projects should we be working on. How do we know we're working on the right projects? How do we know we're working on the projects that matter the most? So EA helps provide that guidance for even inspiring projects that would not otherwise have been inspired or identified or even needed, because we're translating strategy into that actionable guidance for what needs to happen to make the strategy come true. So hopefully that answers your question about the difference between EA and project management and execution.
So the question that I have, kind of coming back to the whole culture change and shift and so forth, you give this long history of, being basically document and artifact driven to being process driven. And from a traditional EA perspective, that's what an enterprise architect does. And that makes sense. It also makes sense to be able to look at business outcomes and say, that this is going to be a measurable, business-driven thing. But that doesn't answer the question. If you go with an outcome-driven approach, what does an enterprise architect do? And so in order to solve that problem, wouldn't an enterprise architect take the old hammer that they always have and pound out documents using the process they know? Or is that not what, I mean, is the culture change in an outcome-driven EA going away from creating the documents and artifacts as they don't provide value? Or are they going away from the traditional process of doing enterprise architecture? And so what does really this outcome-driven EA look like from a task orientation of an enterprise architect?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Let's peel the onion and dive into that a little bit more. So there are 5 buckets or categories of deliverables that this approach produces. They still produce deliverables, and many of the deliverables, or arguably most, if not all of them, are represented in documents, to your point. But we want to make sure that we're not just in the business of creating documents for the sake of creating documents, right? And I've seen too many people weigh the quality of their architecture by how many pages it's represented on, and that's just a really bad approach. I've seen, some of the best architectures I've seen are represented in the fewer amount of pages, and so let me go over the 5 categories and make sure that we're focused here a bit on what needs to be done. So the 5 categories, quickly, let me list them, and then I'll talk more about them. So there's operational deliverables. Second is there's enabling deliverables. Third is there's diagnostic deliverables. Fourth is actionable deliverables, and 5th is measurable deliverables. So let's talk about them and the relationship between them. Operational deliverables are the kind of inwardly, programmatically oriented deliverables that a discipline like EA needs to just operate as a discipline. So these are things around resource management of the EA staff, and how are you going to govern yourselves as a discipline, communication kinds of things, a charter, those kinds of things that are kind of organizational and operational. But at the end of the day, do you suppose the business leaders care about that stuff? No, right? So you want to spend as little time and attention on that as possible, because it's not what matters most in their eyes. Now, you don't want to ignore it. You need a certain amount of it, but that's not where the value is, right? But you need it to kind of just get to operate as a function in the organization. Now, let me flip to the other end of the scale. Measurable deliverables. There's an age-old management adage that says you get what you measure, right? And there's a lot of truth to it. So we need to think about how we're going to measure our impact. And by the way, when we do maturity surveys on EA programs, this is the one that almost always, I've seen about 2 or 3 exceptions in my life, almost always scores the lowest on maturity, is measurability. But this is measuring how are we making an impact with this program to the things that matter most, right? Now, let me talk about the other 3 because they're related. Enabling, diagnostic, and actionable deliverables. The one of the 5 categories that matters the most important category by far, is the actionable deliverables. Why? Because they produce signature-ready, actionable recommendations, if you will, for leaders to sign off on and execute, right? These are things like roadmaps. These are project inception documents. These are reference documents for decision making. These are those things that are closest to what the business will see as value delivered out of the program. Now, the problem with actionable deliverables is that you can't create them from scratch straight away. They are the result of a series of work efforts. So the enabling and diagnostic categories exist as interim work products that lead you to the actionable deliverables. So you start with enabling. That leads to those. That's a work product input to the diagnostic deliverables, which is in turn a work product input to actionable deliverables. Right. So enabling deliverables would be things like, what are the future state requirements for the future state architecture? What are the current state models? Diagnostic deliverables would be things like analysis tools and methods. the future state models that you would contrast against those current state models we talked about with an enabling deliverable. And then it leads to those roadmaps we talked about as actionable deliverables, which is basically how do you get from current to future state. Okay, so these are the kinds of artifacts that or deliverables that are created. But again, all of this is centered around specific transformational business outcome statements that have been identified as the aspirational targets that we're creating these deliverables to manifest through those outcomes. And in turn, those outcomes are addressing some kind of disruption typically that's happening in the business. So let me give you an example. Let's talk about a disruption and a corresponding business outcome that might address the disruption. So a disruption might be social media is enabling, shall we say, near neighbor organizations, sister or kind of organizations, if you will, in an industry, to engage customers in product design. So that's the disruption. Social media is enabling near neighbor organizations to engage customers in product design. Okay, that's just something happening out there in the world that's kind of rocking the boat a bit for your space. So a target business outcome might be, let's create a design forum to enable customers to participate in product design for our organization within 6 months. Okay, so what are we going to do now? How are we going to architect, we might ask, across the business, information technology, and solutions architecture dimensions to enable fulfillment of that? What kind of architecture would support that? What kind of guidance do we need to provide to projects that would execute on doing that, such that it would fit into the larger fabric of the organization appropriately, right? And have the right integration into the rest of the fabric. Okay, so just as one example, we could come up with lots of different examples, but I just thought I'd throw one out there so that we have some kind of example. Other questions? So we've got some chat here. You can read up on this. Perhaps there's another question in audio as well. I don't know if you can hear me, but you're breaking up so bad I can't understand any of it. Dr. Ocker, did you hear that?
Indeed, I did. Eric's typing now. That's who was breaking up before.
Okay.
He writes, what are some of the small methods you see organizations use to energize employees about adopting and being part of EA?
Thank you, Eric. I love that. And so let's speak to that, right? One of the big mistakes EA teams, architect groups have made, and I would say this is true in the prior eras as well as the current era of the business outcome-driven approach, is architects sometimes make the mistake of trying to fully take on the burden of doing the architecting themselves personally. And that's not your job as an architect. At least that's not best practice or leading practice. The job of an architect and an architecture team or group on the org chart is to lead the discipline in the organization, not to do all the architecting personally. So one of the ways you energize employees and engage employees in this, and frankly reduce resistance and get people to embrace it, is by engaging them in doing the work, by involving subject matter experts from around the organization in doing the work, in doing the architecting, because in fact they are subject matter experts and we need their expertise. There's no way that an architect will ever know enough to do all the architecting that needs to be done. That's just not realistic. So it's your job to be the leaders of engaging people in teamwork to do this ideation and to imagine that future state vision, to lay it out in a consumable way and make sure it all fits well together, and to provide that pragmatic guidance to projects and programs. So it's really about, I like to use the analogies of quality. Let's use the lessons of quality. Whose job is quality? Well, it's everybody's job. Well, if that's true, then why do so many of your organizations have a quality group on the org chart? What do you need them for if it's everybody's job, right? Well, you need them because quality is a discipline. Quality doesn't just happen because managers say, go do good quality work. That doesn't make it happen, right? So the quality group's job is to lead the discipline that everybody then has a role to play in doing and executing quality. And so I bring that analogy up because the office of EA, the EA group, the EA team, the architects, if you will, in an organization, they're like the quality group, right? It's the same idea. It's not their job to do all things quality, just like it's not your job to do all things architecture. It's your job to lead it, right? And you engage people from around the organization. So that's how. Now I can use this analogy quite well because I was part of Corning when we won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, and this is what we practice. This is how we achieve that pinnacle of success in quality achievement, is by everybody having skin in the game and doing it, right? And yes, we had a quality group on the org chart. And yes, they led the charge down this path in pursuit of high performance quality, and that's your job in EA. And when people understand that they're part of it, and we're going to embrace their creative energy and their ideas, and we're going to use this discipline of EA to make it all fit better together than it would just with a bunch of individual contributors randomly spouting out great ideas all over the place, and not having a framework to fit it all together in. This is going to help us basically create a more effective sort of teamwork to leverage those talents. Make sense? And then architects should be putting the spotlight on those pieces of excellence with those individuals, and that engages and energizes them because they see that the architects aren't trying to claim credit for all the greatness of ideas that come about. Good question. Great question. Thank you, Eric. What else we got? What was that point about they're the ones with the Minitab licenses? I'm not sure what.
Oh, when you were talking about, why do we even have a quality group?
Oh, okay. Yeah, they often do have Minitab licenses, don't they? Yeah. Good. What else have we got? Now, there was Michael mentioned something I'm not sure we gave specific attention to here. Let's go back to that comment. I've seen EA give birth to a movement. Well, let's see here. Need to sell those with the purse strings to pay for continued EA versus just an initial plan. Well, that's true. I mean, you got to follow the money trail, right? The money trail explains a lot of behavior, and winning over those that have budget and either project budget or operational budget, whatever it is, absolutely is essential. Those are a key stakeholder group for sure. And I agree with your point about not just the initial plan, but the ongoing nature of it. And that's part of what the organization needs to recognize is that EA is not a project. EA doesn't have a beginning and an end. It's an ongoing discipline. It's like quality. Well, when are you going to stop that? Well, if you stop that, the organization dies. EA is an ongoing discipline, right? Michael, I'm not sure I understand your last point. Project got the EA budget. Help me out there. Can you speak? Yeah,
the way it worked is it seemed like a bunch of almost some senior execs and some advisors got together and say, hey, this is going to be the way we go. And then they say, okay, now we'll go put all the money, but they put it all back in the hands of the individual projects to go follow this roadmap that had no champion or authorized influencer. So you were back to where everyone was doing their own thing to be most efficient, but they had a map to look at, and that was it. It makes sense. So they took all the money back away from EA. They only budgeted for the initial product, essentially.
Okay, so this is where you ultimately want to really get the organization to have EA thinking, influencing not just projects individually, but you want EA to influence the budgeting process. One of the problems with budgeting is that they tend to be created by, the leaders go out and ask each of the subordinate groups to put forth a budget proposal, a request, right? And And the problem is each of these departments or projects or whatever they're asking these different organizations to come up with proposals for, they're all using different assumptions for how they prepare, different assumptions about both what they believe they need to do and how they're going to go about doing it to put together the budget request. And so you end up with a fragmented budget in terms of it was based on a bunch of fragmented assumptions that didn't all hang together. So what you want to do is use the EA thinking to influence the entirety of the budget creation process. You want to have the foundation of EA thinking, the principles and the guidelines and the structure to inform the budget preparation process, so that it hangs together more holistically, and that when people put together estimates for both what they want to do and how they want to do it, it was done in an architecturally informed fashion. That is more likely to yield budgets that take into account executing on it appropriately in an architecturally savvy manner, and in a manner that fits with the architectural plan, rather than trying to justify making it fit later, after the fact, right? Which can be a bit more problematic. So, you don't get there overnight, but that's where you want to go. If your architecture program is not influencing the budget development process, then you need to go there, right? So Daniel says, who's driving the outcome-driven EA movement? Are there certain industries or companies, consortiums, et cetera, behind it? I don't know that there's any single entity, organizational entity or standards body or anything like that, that's driving it per se. It's really more of an evolutionary recognition of, as was each of these transitions in the evolution of the discipline. It was kind of a critical mass recognition that, hey, this wasn't working. We can do better than this, right? What were its shortcomings? What can we improve upon? And at Gartner, we're kind of a clearinghouse of best practices knowledge as a commercial research organization. And so, we observed that there was this shift happening, as I mentioned, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, where highest performing EA organizations were taking a markedly different approach to the discipline than were the average performers. And it was this more business outcome driven approach that was the differentiator that we eventually identified as the significant shift that was delivering that higher performance from these programs. So there was no single industry, company, standards body, or consortium, or anything really behind it. And it wasn't Gartner either. What we were the ones to recognize that this is what the latest leading wave of performers are doing that's different, that's getting them higher results. And so we started writing research about it in our research organization. Good question, Daniel. Sometimes shifts like this, are driven by individual, companies or industries or standards bodies or whatever. That's not the case here. Good question. What else have we got out there? What's on your minds? The points I want to make earlier is, this is hard, and it kind of gets back to the point that Professor Acker was bringing up earlier, which is that it's cultural change. People resist change, and we human beings are weird that way, and we resist change even when we know that it's good and that we know how to do it and why to do it. We still resist it. It's really pretty bizarre. And we kind of get in a comfort zone, and this is why being a change agent in this discipline is so important. Is helping people embrace the change and even thrive on the change, because it's good. It's good for the individual. It's good for the organization. The only loser here. So let's talk about that. Who are the losers here, right? Because there are some losers. Let's call them out, right? Who loses with this approach? The people that lose with this approach are individuals that have personal agendas that are more important to them than the organizational agenda and where the organization's trying to go. And it's these folks that I want what I want at the expense of everything else. right? This approach does not embrace those people and their thinking and their approach to work, nor should it, right? Organizations don't exist to serve the individual. It's the other way around, right? And if somebody has an individual agenda that's of that mindset, then maybe there's someplace else they ought to work. Because they're getting in the way. They're getting in the way of your organization accomplishing what it needs to do.
What if they're pretty higher up, like VIPs and?
Yeah, well, that gets a little more interesting. Good question. And that's why it is so important to gain the highest level executive sponsorship and support for this kind of transformational initiative that one can. We want C-suite engagement here. Middle management is often some of the biggest problem, and so go for the if I can say it, go for the C-suite. The minimum CIO, but really ultimately you want buy-in beyond the IT leader, the senior most IT leader, to include some business leaders, and that helps a ton. That's actually the single most important thing, is having that senior management stakeholder understanding and support. Now, a couple of variations Teresa brings in here, or how about a government employee that's been around for 30 years, or that might be the case in I've seen that same kind of a variation on that theme. Teresa is a large utility, perhaps, that's been in a monopolistic industry and been there for a long time, a very senior employee. These folks tend to be the most resistant to change, which is, I think, why you raise it. And so what we want to do in organizations where you see these kinds of things is, and this is where the business outcome driven approach actually helps us, because what you're going to want to do is choose a business outcome that is in an area of the organization where you're able to get the necessary senior stakeholder understanding and support to pursue it, right? So don't go after the area where you've got a middle or upper management person that is that has the wrong motives and isn't going to get on board and is not going to be a champion. Don't go after an outcome in that area. Go after an outcome in another area where you can get that champion and win the success. Get a track record of some successful wins, and use that to create peer pressure that will cause other parts of the organizations to jump on because they're seeing success. And at that point, they start to look bad in the organization and build a bad name for themselves if they're a detractor because, hey, this is proven to work in our organization. Look at the success they're having over there. Why wouldn't I jump on that bandwagon, right? So they're generally not going to call themselves out in a bad way. So you go where you can get the necessary support, whether it be at the senior level or even if you've got a lower level person that's been around for 30 years and doesn't want to get on board, but they would be important to go after this. Again, go after an area where you can get the critical mass of support that you need from lower or upper levels. Get the wins there, and start to build a track record that others will follow, and use the peer pressure to your advantage. Okay. Cynthia says every department at my company has an agenda, meet their department goals by the end of the year. Sure, they do. And solutions offer narrow one-offs, quick win. Yeah, and so there are. You're not going to win them all, right? There are going to be areas that are pursued that are going to be suboptimal, and this drives architects nuts because they see that we're not tackling it all. They see these individual projects that are pressing ahead in non-optimal ways. And what we have to do is just recognize that, hey, we're not going to win them all. We need to. We don't need all. It's kind of like war. If you look at a war analogy, you don't need to win every battle in order to win the war. You need to win the strategically important battles to win the war, right? And so choose your battles is the message, right? Win the important battles and you'll get where you're trying to go, and eventually more of the organization will embrace it and jump on the bandwagon. So be strategically smart.
I think that's a good place to end.
Oh gosh, that time flew by. Wow. Wasn't been watching the clock.
It's exactly 9 o'clock on Apple time on my Mac. So Scott, that's great. I took notes. I learn something every time I speak or hear you speak. Not every time I speak, but every time I speak with you and hear you speak, and look at the thank yous rolling in the chat window. So
well, I want to thank everyone for being here, for being active participants both in chat and by voice. I've thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity. And I would encourage you all to, as you do this, be the eternal optimist, right? Be pragmatic, be realistic, but be optimistic. I don't see too many successful but pessimistic architects. Okay, so be optimistic. Things aren't going to be ideal, but that's the real world that we're in. And hey, look at it this way. If you get this half right, you're going to make a serious big difference in the organization. You don't have to be perfect to make a big difference in a positive way. And so thank you all as well. I wish you well. I think a lot of this program that's been put together at Penn State, I think it's somewhat unique in the world, certainly in North America. And it continues to evolve in ways that I think are fantastic. So I'm glad to see you're plugged into it, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone. Great session tonight. Thank you for your participation. And with that, I believe we're done for tonight.